Kia ora tātou, nau mai, haere mai, and good morning everybody for our council meeting to adopt our annual budget for 2025-26 here for Wednesday the 4th of June 2025. If I could ask the Deputy Mayor to open with a karakia.
Tēnā koe, Your Worship, o te rā, tēnā tātou, talo whalawa, Nisa Pulavanaka, kia orana, tēnā koutou. Tū tawa mai i runga, tū tawa mai i raro, tū tawa mai i roto, tū tawa mai i waho. Kia tau ai te Māori tū, te Māori ora, ki te katoa, haumi e, hui e, tāe ki e. Tēnā koutou, kia ora, Your Worship.
Kia ora. Number 2 on our order papers, councillors, is around apologies. But before we get to that, I better do the housekeeping and safety procedures. In the unlikely event of an emergency and hearing the alarm, we will leave through the nearest fire exits, the green signs, and we will evacuate to the assembly area, the clock tower, and the square to Maraehine. In terms of health and safety, non-smoking and vaping facilities, so you'll do that outside the building. Again, unlikely event of needing a defibrillator, that is located outside the entrance of customer services on the ground floor, and toilets are just in the link span there. As you entered, if you have any, please report any incidences to our committee administration here. The meeting is being recorded, it's being live streamed on the Council's YouTube channel. And if I could just ask any speakers if they perhaps just acknowledge themselves, say their name and title in the first instance, just for those online. And we do have Councillor Hancock online, and we'll now go to our apologies, and we have a recommendation that we receive apologies from Councillor Rowley Fitzgerald. I'm happy to move those, seconded by the Deputy Mayor, and we will vote, please. And that is passed, 15 votes for and none against. Right, declarations of interest. The Deputy Mayor.
Kia ora, Your Worship. I have a conflict of interest with item 8 and will remove myself when that is discussed. Thank you.
Thank you, that's noted. Public comment. I have no public comment. There's nothing from the floor. Right, we'll move through to number 6 and 7, and this is around, we'll take these together unless anyone wishes them to be separate, but we have 2 recommendations. Okay, you want them separated. All right, we'll do the first one. A confirmation of minutes and recommendation to Council that the minutes of the Ordinary Council meeting 7th of May 2025, Part 1 public and Part 2 shall be confirmed as a true and correct record. I'm happy to move those, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. Are there any matters arising? There being none, we will vote. That is passed, 15 votes for and none against. All right, we'll move through. Okay, our second confirmation of minutes around recommendation to Council. The minutes of the Ordinary Council meeting of the 14th of May 2025, Part 1 public be confirmed as a true and correct record. I'm happy to move those, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. Are there any matters arising? Okay, we'll vote, please. And that is passed, 15 votes for and none against. All right, we move through to number 8 on our order paper, and this is around a notice of motion around the Palmerston North Boys High School hockey turf project. And Councillor Wood, I'll move to you.
Good morning, councillors. You'll be glad to know this is the only recommendation coming from me today, so we can all breathe a sigh of relief. This is the reconsideration of the PMBHS hockey turf motion, with their responding to the request for funding which came through our annual budget. The suggestion here is that we provide $33,500 in the 25-26 budget, and then refer the similar amount to the next 2 annual budget processes. To be very clear today, I'm not suggesting that we sign a contract with Boys High or go ahead and confirm that we will be providing this funding going forward. All we are discussing today is the $33,500 for this annual budget, with the remaining amount being referred for those other processes. The reason for this is threefold. Firstly is the community nature of this facility, PMBHS. I won't repeat the debate we've recently had in the annual budget deliberations, but PMBHS is a well-known player in supporting community organisations and supporting other schools with access to their facilities, and this would provide a great hub for hockey activity. I've expressed before my preference for this approach. I think there's great value in supporting other organisations to own, build, operate and maintain facilities, and that comes at a lower long-term cost to the city versus us building, maintaining, administering and operating facilities. So I think there's a net saving in the long run for supporting these kind of projects. And thirdly, I'd ask councillors if there was a motion that you were particularly passionate about that had failed 7 votes to 7 and a councillor hasn't been present, that you think might have changed the result, I expect a number of us would have put a notice of motion forward to bring that motion back for reconsideration. So I think it's only fair to do so, given it was such a tight vote at the annual budget deliberations. So I hope we can support this and look forward to hearing the debate if there is one.
Thank you, Councillor. Look, I won't speak to what the debate was earlier, other than in terms of value to the ratepayer, it's less than 1% of the cost of the project, and we get community use out of it. Those that know about the Spears Centre will see the value that that school facility provides to the wider arts community. The same could be said for their swimming and gym facilities, not just to the other education providers, i.e. other schools and high schools, but actually the wider community. So this comes with some tags on community use, so I do hope you see value in supporting it. There being no other speakers, no right of reply, we will vote. Oh, sorry, Councillor Harpiter.
I'm happy to second this. I don't see anyone seconding.
It's in the papers. I seconded it.
Okay.
Yeah. All right, we will vote, please. And that is passed 11 votes for and 3 against. All right. We will move through to number 9, and this is around recommendations from the Community Committee, Part 1 Public on the 21st of May 2025, and I'll ask that Councillor Johnson to speak to those.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. So first of all, I'd just like to move the Community Committee recommendation 12.25, which is the location for a public toilet at Albert Street. I'd like to move that particular recommendation first, please. And I think Councillor Hancock will second. Just check with him.
And I understand Councillor Hancock, yes, thank you, is seconding that as the Deputy Chair. All right. There being no commentary, we will vote on 12.25 only, Councillor, is that right? Yeah, thank you. And that is passed 12 votes for, 2 abstentions and 1 against. All right, we'll go back to the second part of this, and this is around the recommendation to engage sector lead organisations, clause 11.25. Councillor.
Thank you. So I'd like to move that the recommendation to engage sector lead organisations, 11.25, be adopted, and that the item concerning New Vaca Trust, which was laid on the table, be lifted from the table so that we can vote on that afterwards. And if I can just give a couple of words of explanation, is that okay? As you will be aware, elected members, staff have engaged with Pacifica Reference Group and with the elected members who were involved in the motion to put the New Vaca Trust on the table. And I believe that any objections that were being raised have been dealt with and misunderstandings clarified. And so I think it's an appropriate time now that we lift this item off the table, in particular, given that the period of the agreement is the 1st of July 2025 to 30 June. And so I think it's important that we get this lifted and dealt with in enough time for it to go ahead. And I would just like to say, on behalf of the committee, that I apologise for any hurt that has occurred to New Vaca Trust as a result of that decision. As you'll be aware, it wasn't one that I thought was sensible, but at the same time, it was the decision of the committee, and so I feel that New Vaca Trust have perhaps, well not perhaps, have definitely been offended by that decision, and that they feel that it has caused them harm, and so I would like to apologise for that. Thank you.
Councillors, what we'll do is we'll vote on the first part there, number 1, first, around agreeing to the sector lead partnership agreement with the Management Trust first, separately. So are there any further comments on that? There being none, we'll just vote on number 1 first. And that is passed 14 votes for, 1 abstention. Right, we'll go back through to, and what we're going to do now is we're just going to vote, we have to vote first under understanding orders to lift off the table, the council lift off the table the New Vaca Trust sector lead for the period of 1 July 25 to 30 June 28. So we're lifting that off the table, that's all we're voting on here. There being no other commentary, Councillor Naylor.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I hadn't been alerted to this item being the intention for this to be placed back on the table today, so I'm certainly not well prepared to be making a decision. I felt that when the committee laid it on the table, there were some issues and concerns around the policy and around the future of how many sector lead organisations there should be, whether some of us actually felt comfortable with the policy or whether that perhaps needs to be reviewed. And given the term that is proposed here right through till June 28, my feeling is that those concerns, whilst there has been some email commentary in the last couple of weeks, I acknowledge, the reasons that I was comfortable support laying it on the table still do exist, and in my view I would prefer to be making a more well-informed decision, so I won't be supporting lifting this off the table today.
Okay. Councillor Johnson, right reply.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I would just like to address some of the points that have been raised by Councillor Naylor. The first one is about not being well informed. All elected members have received information from staff and from Pacifica Reference Group about the discussions that have occurred since the item was put on the table. And the reasoning for putting the item on the table, as I recall, was for more consultation to be done with Pacifica Reference Group and the wider community, not anything to do with review of the policy. So the reasons for the item being put on the table have been addressed, and all councillors are aware of that. Secondly, I acknowledge that there are a number of councillors, myself included, who would like to see a review of the policy. And those who were at committee will remember that I asked staff questions about when the policy was up for review, and it is up for review in year 2 of the long-term plan, in other words, the year that we're going into. And that gives us the opportunity to make any changes to policy that we feel that will be appropriate, including, if necessary, the number of sector leads, etc. Having concerns about the policy is not a reason not to lift this item off the table at this point. And the third point I'd like to make is that we have set the policy and process for this to occur, and staff have followed that process, and there's no reason for us to make a different process for one individual organisation. That simply hangs that organisation out to dry in the community and is unacceptable in my opinion.
Okay, councillors, we will vote. And that has passed 13 votes for, 1 against and 1 abstention. All right, we will now move back to and this is the final part of these recommendations around council engaging the following organisation through sector lead partnership agreement for the period of 1 July 2025 to 30 June 2028. Nuvaka Trust, and that's moved by Councillor Johnson, seconded by Councillor Hancock. Councillor.
So this is the, sorry, I know this is a bit bureaucratic, but this is the final part of the process, basically. If you recall from the paper, Nuvaka Trust had applied to be a sector lead through the correct process. Staff had assessed them through the correct process and determined that they would be a good choice for a sector lead. And that is a social service sector lead. It's not intended to be any kind of cultural lead, which I think were some of the concerns that were raised in the meeting. So, you know, Nuvaka Trust are doing exceptionally good work in the community. They have gone through the process as every other organisation that we've made a sector lead have done, and I think we really must approve their engagement as a sector lead at this stage. Thank you.
Colleagues, I wasn't here when this particular item came through, but I do support the recommendation as well. And it is, I think the important thing is here, I think there has been quite a lot of mix-ups, and this is a social services sector lead agreement. And yes, Nuvaka Trust do great work in our Pacifica community, and if I could just acknowledge you there today, especially, I was going to say Dame Annie, but our new King's Honour recipient there, Annie Schoon, but also it's Samoan Language Week as well. So I think putting a positive angle on things, it's quite nice that you are in the chamber for things. So I strongly advise you to support this. For those of us that have a lot to do with the Pacifica community, this is special for them, but this is really around social services, and that's where I think there was some confusion. So please support this. Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. Just to follow on from my earlier comments, I think when the procedural motion was put on the table, due to our standing orders, members don't have the opportunity to explain their reasons for supporting that or otherwise. I think the mover had the opportunity to explain his reasons, but certainly I think some assumptions have been made about perhaps some of other elected members who supported that at that time. At the time, I did have some concerns about how many sector leads we're actually thinking that we want to support, and certainly I understand the policy has been followed, but it did raise some questions with me about whether I was entirely comfortable with the process. The part of the process also that is followed is that decision comes to council for a decision. I think there should be no assumptions in the community by any group that that council is sorry, I can't think of the word, that council is obligated to support every recommendation that is put on the table by officers. The mere fact that it comes to council for endorsement means that that is something that we can consider in a broader sense about our comfort level. Now, I have no issue with Nuavaka Trust and appreciate the vast work they do in the community, as many organisations do that we support through strategic priority grants and, in fact, sector group leads as well. But that doesn't mean to say that I believe that every group in the community that's doing valuable work should become a sector lead. And in terms of the term that this covers, right through to June 28, the reason I don't want to support it today is that I would support a review of the policy, and rather than simply adding into that more and more sector leads in the process, if we were to do a review of the process, I think it would be a better time to consider a request such as this following that review. So I just wanted to be clear about why I won't be supporting this recommendation today.
Right, a reply.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Just to respond to those comments in the right of reply, I really don't see why Nuavaka Trust would be singled out as the organisation that we would suddenly decide that there were too many sector leads. On the same day, in the same paper, there was MASH Trust. Nobody said that we had too many sector leads when MASH Trust was put up. And in particular, it's hard for organisations working in the Pacifica Social Services to be working with a population that's often quite vulnerable, that is sometimes marginalised, and then to be the organisation in which, you know, some elected members raise an issue about, just makes them feel more marginalised, and I don't think that's right at all. If you want to be consistent, every other organisation that's been put up should also be questioned. So I really feel quite strongly that, you know, in fairness, no questions were raised about MASH Trust, and not that I'm suggesting we should have raised any, but if your argument is we've got too many sector leads, that argument would have applied equally to MASH Trust, and no queries were raised about that. So I don't buy that as an argument, and I would urge you strongly to please support Nuavaka Trust becoming a sector lead partnership agreement. Thank you.
All right, we will vote, please. That has passed 13 votes for, 1 against and 1 abstention. All right. We'll now move through to number 10 on our order paper. And this is our first report, and this is around fees and charges, and a paper there around confirmation following the consultation, and there's a memo there on page 43 of your papers, councillors, and invite Steve Patterson to present that, please.
Yeah, good morning, Mr. Mayor and councillors. Back in February, you addressed the issue of fees and charges for the forthcoming year for a whole range of council services, and then there were two of them that were required to go through a public consultation phase, and this report is just reporting back on following that consultation. You'll see and be aware that we received 2 submissions in relation to the planning and miscellaneous charges and no submissions in relation to the trade waste charges. From my perspective, the submissions provided, I guess, nothing new that we hadn't considered at the time that the original decision was made back in February, and for that reason our recommendation is that you endorse the fees and charges as attached to the order paper and as approved back in February.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Isabella.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor, and thanks, Steve. I had a couple of questions. One at paragraph 2.3, which is regarding our fees being seen as unreasonably high, and the paragraph notes that we do have the highest fees or some of the highest fees in the other 10 councils that we benchmarked against. And the commentary there is that meaningful comparisons are very difficult to make, although future efforts will be made to better understand some of those reasons. Just wondered, why is that so difficult, and when could we expect some better comparisons that we could understand why we are charging so highly?
Why is it difficult? Well, we all, despite being a local government, we all do things differently, it seems, at times, in terms of the way we account for various activities and what we record as being the cost of delivering those activities. And we make different decisions about the way we structure ourselves to do that. And in the end as well, sometimes there are policy differences about what proportion of the costs we feel as a council should be borne by the developers or whoever compared with the ratepayers at large. It is tricky to analyse those. I mean, it can be done, but digging below the surface a bit just to get to the detail of why there's a difference does quite involve a lot of work. At the moment, we haven't, I suppose, scheduled that work as being of super high priority amongst the things that the staff are struggling to achieve for the moment. And that's sort of mentioned in the report that the staff are focusing on improving systems and processes, particularly at the moment, so that we can get to the bottom really of delivering a very good service and being comfortable with that, and then at a later stage looking more closely at the way in which the finances are structured for the particular area and why it might be that we feel that we need to be nearer the top end of the charges.
Thank you. So we can pretty much check the level of fees against what others charge, but we can't really investigate what lies behind them, sort of in a too hard basket until a later time?
Yes, indeed.
Do we have a later time?
We haven't specifically identified a time for that at the moment, but we need to go away and talk about that.
Okay, thank you. My other question is relating to Mr. Fugel's submission, and in paragraph 13 he talks there about the fixed limited notified subdivision charges for up to 20 lots versus exceeding 20 lots, and he talks about he questions the excessive difference in that, and how that's not necessarily requiring more complex or time-consuming work. Just that wasn't addressed, that point in his submission wasn't addressed in the report. I wondered if someone had a comment about that particular point.
It's not an area of my expertise, but if
I'll just pass that to perhaps Jeff. Thank you.
Kia ora koutou, ko Jeff Baker-Aho, I'm the Planning Services Manager. Is it possible just to repeat that question just again? Thanks.
Yeah, sure. In Mr. Fugel's submission, he talks about the fixed limited notified subdivision charges up to 20 lots and then in exceeding of 20 lots. And there being, in his view, an excessive difference based on the level of work required. And I wondered that hadn't been addressed in the report that was addressing his submissions. So he has said that if it's $28,000 for up to 20 lots, and then it jumps to $48,000 after 20 lots, but he argues that the bulk of that work is undertaken by professionals outside of council, and that larger lots of subdivisions might not necessarily be more complex or time consuming to the extent that the fee implies.
I think the first answer to that question, or the first comment I make, is those are indicative, those charges. It does depend on the particular consent in question. It's very difficult to sort of draw the line, and while I understand where he's coming from around potentially the additional work involved, my experience and what we've found, particularly with the work up in his area, is it takes an enormous amount of work to review those consents and process them through to granting. So it's not as straightforward as delineating a line above or below. It's actually done on a full cost recovery basis on the individual merits of the consent.
Right, so the fixed charge is more of an indicative charge in that respect.
Yeah, the fixed charge is a technical reference coming from the Resource Management Act. In reality, it's more of an indicative charge for which some developers use as a guideline for what it costs, but in reality, we charge as we go as per the true cost of a given consent.
Great, thank you. Thanks very much. I just have one further question for that table that's on page 52, and I was just comparing those increases since I first saw this report in 2022, and particularly around the extensions of time, Section 125 applications. And that's, in my understanding for the Act, that a Section 125 application requires the officer to assess the application based on progress made, approvals from affected persons, and then consistency with planning. But I just wondered, that's gone up from $1,200 in 2022 to I think $1,425 at the moment, and I just wondered what's behind that level of increase. Is there additional fees that are incurred through other processes?
I think it's fair to say that both those figures in both years, you're talking from 2022 you mentioned.
Yes.
So in both years we've just had a percentage movement that we've applied to those, and that's consistent across the charges. So it reflects the level of movement in costs more or less that we've had, and that's been applied consistently across the different categories.
And so the cost in this instance is officer time?
Yes, mainly.
Okay, thank you. And I just had one more niggly one, which was about the replacement of copies of certificates also increasing. Is it costing us extra $5 each year to print and deliver a certificate?
That's just a year-on-year adjustment, isn't it? It's kind of self. It's 130 to 134.
I think we tend to round those just a fraction to the nearest dollar, so I'm not sure whether that particular one, I haven't double checked back to see how that's moved, but again, we've just been applying a percentage rounded to those.
Okay, thank you. Thanks very much.
Gentlemen, probably for the whole room, it'd be fair to say that we didn't have any movement for quite a few years, and things caught up on us 3 years ago, in terms of, especially in your side, Jeff, where in some of those bigger consenting projects we did have to lift things because we had a rate and we were either losing money or we were massively having to add extra charges on. Would that be a fair comment?
Yeah, we run a user pays service,
Yeah.
so the true costs of those consents are passed on more or less at 100%.
And it's now reflected more fairly in some of these tables.
Yeah.
Yeah. And other councils, and look, I've seen other councils where their policy bands subsidise some of their work. Would that be another fair comment?
In broad terms, our council's policy does subsidise the cost of the whole planning services function to quite a significant extent. I think it was in here I mentioned that overall for the resource consenting side of the business, the fees and charges that we're budgeting, I think it was just less than 50% recovery we're looking for in the coming year. So that's acknowledging that there is quite a lot of work that's done that's for the public good, if you like. For that part that's really directed to the developers and a particular development, we would expect to try to recover 100% of the cost of that.
Okay,
and yes, some other councils may not be doing that.
I should have rephrased my question. Other councils subsidise it even further than we do.
Well, I'm presuming they must if they end up with the charges that some of them are making.
All right. Councillor Harper.
Thank you. Just my question's around, is it a CPI or inflationary increase? Can we put it down to any of those? Because every bracket has been increased.
In each activity, we look at what the movement in costs and the cost drivers are for that particular activity, and then decide whether some sort of indicator of the level of change. It's not necessarily the CPI. Sometimes it can be similar to that, but it's an indicator. We mentioned back in the original reports what the particular percentages that were applied to the fees and charges, and in this particular case, I don't have a recollection of what that was.
Okay, so no clear answer to that. In the Resonate submission, they talk about the hourly rate being charged out at $2.45, and then they talk about a reduction from last year at $2.68 and split into the senior, intermediate and junior. Can you comment on their submission and what's your view on what they said?
Yes, what they've done is they've picked up on a historical thing where experts that feed into the process have been charged at a certain rate. And what Brian Green and his team have argued is that rate was too high, and that a lower averaged rate or a lower rate might be more applicable. So what we did is we looked at the rates, high, medium and low, and then what we've done is adjusted it to a medium rate. And the reason we've chosen a medium rate is because it's fairer. And also it's easier for us to administer. I think there was a comment in there about providing a high level of sort of splitting it into various levels as well, but what that does at our end is it creates a lot more administrative hassle. So what we did is just take an averaging approach. So it goes some way towards addressing some of his concerns, but we're balanced against the practicality of administering those costs as well.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. On page 57, on the last line of that template, it looks like the technical and professional staff rate is going down, and I just wanted to question that particularly. Seems like the odd one out.
Yeah, that's the one we've just been talking about just a moment ago, where there was an averaging approach taken. Jeff just talked about that a moment ago.
Okay, sorry, I was looking at other things there. Also, can I understand with one of the questions from one of the submitters was around the effectiveness or the efficiency of our processes. Can we understand in regards to the consenting processes for some of these applications, how often we meet the timeframes that are expected for those processes to be conducted?
Yeah, I don't think I can get it to the nearest percent, but my recollection is we're on target for about 75% consents on time this year. That's a marked increase from last year, which was in the order of 50%. So we've seen a significant bump on that front. In relation to some of the comments of that submitter, of course, the quality of the applications and the team that is used making those applications is crucial as well. If those things are in play, and we attempt to do that through pre-application meetings, set it up, then there's a much higher chance consents will go through on time.
Okay. So there's a reliance on the information and the quality of
Absolutely.
completeness.
Yeah, it's the two go hand in hand.
Yep. Okay, so you're taking comments separately to the questions at this stage. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. Thanks for the report. Just on page 44, it talks about officers believe the fees and charges proposed fairly reflect the cost incurred by council. I'm just interested to know when determining the cost incurred by council, does that include the overheads, or is it just the costs that relate to that activity?
It includes overheads, because overheads are a component of what it costs to deliver the activity in the end.
Okay, and so in terms of Mr. Fugel's comments in point 2 of his submission, where he extrapolates an assumption of what a person might be earning based on the fees, has anyone had the opportunity to explain to him the impact of overheads and that all the costs are not just simply the salary?
I haven't ventured into that territory with Mr. Fugel.
Okay, thank you. And just one other question. At the bottom of page 44, it talks about council's approaches to recover 100% of what has been allocated to chargeable time. And then in the chart following that at the top of page 45, it shows that the private aspect is only recovered at an 89% level, so there's about 220,000 additional expenses that aren't covered through those fees. I'm just wondering if that's the policy and that's the intent, why we've got that level of gap.
During the process of preparing the budget, the figures were moving around a great deal, partly because we were reassessing the allocation of overheads a lot, and they had quite a significant impact on the activity. So at some points in the process, it looked like we were setting revenue assumptions that would cover what we were saying was the cost of that part of the activity, and in later parts of the process, it appeared not to be so. And so I think for the moment, we decided that we would run with what we have there in terms of our expectations about revenue, and then as the structure settles down and we can look at the way in which we can review the way overheads are falling, we'll get a better feel for whether we're actually meeting the overall 100% objective or not. Sometimes these figures, of course, well, these figures do rely heavily on an assessment of what the volumes the council's going to receive in terms of applications, and so we could be out in that respect or have some sort of different types of applications to what we thought, and then be closer to the target in reality than what we've assumed in the budget. So I think we just wait and see what's happening.
Yeah, thanks, that's helpful.
Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. On page 53, I've just been looking. At the moment, we're advertising for our team leader for planning services, and that advertised band is within $99,000 to $150,000 a year, which at a full-time role works out to about $47 to $67 an hour. In this paper, we're suggesting we're going to charge out at $270 an hour for that role, which at maximum, I repeat, is only around $67 an hour we'd be paying them. In light of Councillor Naylor's questions, that implies we're paying $203 an hour in overheads for that service, which does seem unreasonable. So can I get an understanding of how we've come to the conclusion that charging out at about 3 or 4 times the hourly rate of that individual is reasonable in terms of what we put on our development community?
Well, there are obviously different types of costs that are not just overhead, not just day-to-day corporate overheads that are involved in a process, and whether the rate is 3 times what we would pay someone, I'm not sure in this case, but we can see in terms of what we end up charging, what the total revenue is that we end up receiving, and we know the number of hours we're charging. So I guess what I said is we're concentrating best we can on looking at the way in which we do things and the way in which we're billing this type of work in order to make sure that we're recovering what we think we could and what we think we should. And if in the end our experience is that we're doing better in terms of those returns than what we've assumed, when we next review the hourly rates, we can bring forward a suggestion for not such a large increase or a lower increase. But as I said, when we bill, we know what the overall thing's costing us. We know the types of staff that we generally have in those areas, and what the costs are that are being assessed against that activity. And to generate the revenue, we do need to have the figures set at this sort of level.
Okay. Have we ever been challenged on these fees before? Have other councils been challenged on these kind of fees before?
We've had submissions when we've advertised them in the past, but in terms of a challenge, I'm not sure, Jeff.
In my recollection, I don't recall us being challenged on the hourly rates per se. We've had challenges on given consents and the overall cost, but not specifically on the hourly rates. As Steve mentioned before, we did do some work looking at 10 other councils. Our rates are in the top sort of quartile. In some cases, we're right near the top. They're not completely out of whack with the range that we saw there. And in terms of the salary that you mentioned, that's commensurate with what the market's sort of paying. In fact, in some cases, probably on the low side. Yeah. Okay. And so my final question would be then, if we're charging at the top rate of, what is reasonable to charge for these services across the country, but only delivering 75% of consents on time, can I get an understanding of, are we delivering a top service for a top charge? Pretty difficult for me to say, to really comment on that sort of bar, to be honest. We're doing the best we can with the resources we've got. We've got a plan to improve efficiencies and processes, and we've been working on that, and you can see the results in the last year. I wouldn't be able to say what defines top. I personally don't know what the top council in New Zealand is, and it's probably subjective whether they are just on consents on time the top council as well, because quality is a huge factor as well too.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Harpiter.
Sorry to come back in, just one more question. If these changes don't go through, well, how will that affect your operation going forward?
How will it affect the operation? Well, obviously, if there are not the increases that we recommend, the council won't get the revenue we've assumed, and I guess we just face the consequences of that through the budget process.
Thank you.
Or through the annual report process, through the year.
All right, thank you, gentlemen. Okay, colleagues, we have fees and charges and confirming these and the recommendations to council. 1, that council receive the submissions for fees and charges, attachment 1. 2, that council approve the fees and charges for planning and miscellaneous services as scheduled in attachments 2 and 3, effective from 1 July 2025. And 3, that council approve the fees and charges for tradeways services as scheduled in attachment 4, effective from 1 July 2025. I'm happy to move those. I have a seconder. Oh, thank you, Councillor Dennison. Just seeing who was looking this way. Anyway, look, colleagues, a bit of discussion there. And look, can I just remind people, in the scheme of things, this is $1.7 million worth of fees in a $240 million organisation. So it's small in the bigger scheme, but it does have a 50% policy recovery. And look, I just want to signal that although the city is affordable in many other areas, fees and charges are in the upper quartile, and the officers acknowledge that themselves. And I'll be certainly, in moving these, I'll certainly be asking the CE and officers to look for efficiencies where possible, because we just can't keep raising costs year on year on year. So why are we here in this place now? And I think it's fair to say that other councils have a greater subsidisation. I know that for a fact, including some of them around us. And there's reasons because they haven't had development, so they chase development and they set different policies. There was a catch-up for those that have been here a little bit longer. There was a catch-up a few years ago because we'd put out fees and we're consistently sending out bills for more than what the fees were. And the officers explained that some of our consents now are quite complex. And look, each council's different too. The land that they are on, and I'll go to that in a minute, why Palmerston North is slightly different to perhaps some of our other more flatter colleagues around us. And also the sectors, especially the commercial sectors you're consenting. And we have some quite complex areas around wind farms, highways, and logistics and warehousing, which is slightly different to others around us than what we've perhaps even been compared to. But we do need to acknowledge and encourage our development sector. And I do acknowledge the submitters and some of their consultants, remembering their consultants are paid by the developers, so it's only right that they perhaps advocate strongly for them. But the officers talked about it's all the good land's gone, so we're now dealing with land that needs a lot more work. So the pre-app meetings and the applications do need to be of a high quality. As I said, most of the good land's gone, so to ensure that council consents good quality developments, it does need things like environmental stormwater reports, geotech reports, different sorts of engineering reports, and these consents are quite complex. It's slightly different to perhaps a flat piece of land where you're consenting just a single dwelling. So I just want to acknowledge that although it may seem in some eyes and some of the questions that we're out of kilter, I don't think we are. It's just the environment that we're in at the moment and some of the complex nature of development in the current environment. And of course the RMA is changing as well, just to add another little bit of complexity to it as on top of that. So I've created a bit of time for you to get into the queue, so we'll start with Councillor Isabella.
Thank you, Ms Mayor, and I just want to thank officers for the answers because that was very helpful. I think each year that I've sat here, the fees have been increased by some blanket percentage, and next year it will cost $140 likely to print a replacement certificate, where in 2022 it cost $115. But I think that on reflection, perhaps at this table we don't have very clear insight into the level of percentage that's applied or the accuracy of the cost recovery or why our fees are comparatively so high. And it's not just this, we're high in dog registration as well. And I just think that we don't have many options but to accept this year-on-year increase. But when people ask me about it, I don't feel like I have enough information to robustly defend it. And if they have to go up, they have to go up. But I would like a stronger basis on which to defend and explain it when I'm questioned so that I can, front it. And so I think a little more information would be greatly appreciated. Thank you.
Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. In determining whether we believe fees and charges are fair and reasonable, we have to firstly understand what makes up what is put into those fees and charges, and understanding that the overheads are included in that, which is $42.8 million for our organisation this year. How that's allocated across activities, I think as elected members we have very little understanding of. Those overheads include corporate services, comms and marketing, costs for cafeteria, a whole list of things that may not directly relate to the activity that we're charging fees for. So my view is that with the information we have now, I'm comfortable to approve these recommendations, but I do want to say that going forward, I think as elected members, we have to have a much better understanding of the overheads and how they're allocated across charges. I think some of the submitters have raised reasonable points when they've said perhaps they don't think it's fair or reasonable. And unless we're explaining to them how much is added on for those overheads, then they're not going to understand or believe that they're fair and reasonable either. So I think some of those charges that relate to overheads need to be much more clear to us and need to be much more clear to the community, need to be much more transparent going forward.
Councillor Denison.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My thoughts are really around previous speakers, around the understanding and confidence to stand behind these figures and these increases. And one that I think has been a reoccurring issue year after year, in fact, because these fees do just go up, and it would be one of the reoccurring things I hear back from the development community is the frustration around the time and costs of these processes. And one of the points, so just speaking really around the concerns, around saying that we're typically at the top end or near the top of these 10 comparative councils, it doesn't give me the confidence that we're in the right space in that assessment. I think we should be just going for middle. I don't think this is the best in class that we want to be capturing mega costs on our development community. Then, to a second point, is around the environment that we're in over this period. There's a slowdown in the construction and development community across the country. And to say that we should be, some councils are chasing business, I actually think we should be, some of the words used in the past, open for business and actually being available and not being at that top end. I think that's a deterrent. If you're looking to locate out of one of those 10 councils, who do you want to work with? Some of those councils that are at the lower end of that development cost, it almost feels, it's just the wrong mix for where we want to sit with a growing city. So for my mind, I'm not comfortable, and I'm going to ask that two be separated, and I was happy to move or have it seconded to get on the table, but actually, if I was being true to myself and true to this whole process of submission process and hearing from the submitters and hearing about are these costs increase reasonable or unreasonable, has the explanation been quite clear and transparent? And I think there's still a bit of grey in how they've come about. And a bit like just putting costs up to send out administration costs because somebody asks what was supposedly only going to be $4 or something, it's going to be $5 and all this other stuff. It's just got this creep that I'm just not happy with. And when you put an increase year on year, the increases just get bigger and bigger actually. When you and so sitting in it feels like this mic's coming on and off. Or you're trying to cut me out of my key points. I've got to wait for the eject button soon, so I've got to straighten myself in. But I know that this may not be popular, but I am speaking for that development community, and I'm going to oppose to when it's separated for those very reasons I've outlined. I think reasonableness, I think the cost of the environment, the downturn in the environment, all those other factors, I think we should be thinking a bit more considerate about how we cast these costs. Not to mention, that point was inquired about around the time efficiencies of our service. If we're going to charge best in class across 10 different councils, we want to be delivering an efficient and effective service. And I take the point that there's a reliance on the submitter with the quality and completeness of the information they provide, but equally so, I do hear feedback around things, delays just with gaps in our processes too. So, ngā mihi. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Hapara.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm also not going to support number 2, and my reasons is I've also heard from the development community, and it was really good to see Mr. Pugel and Mr. Green via his consultant come into the chamber and actually put a submission in, because you don't normally see developers come into the chamber. It's good to hear from both of them, to hear their views, but I have heard that we are probably one of the most expensive councils to develop in. And they're saying it's better to go and develop in Horowhenua and it's better to go and develop in Manawatu because our council is too expensive and too timely and too much delay. So those are the sort of reasons they're giving us that it is hard to develop in Palmerston North. So for that reason, I won't support 2, which is, if you look at every single factor in here, everything's been increased. And I'm pretty similar to Councillor Zabellin, didn't hear a lot of reasons of why these things are going up. I didn't feel there was a lot of support around the reasons of why they're going up. Just didn't, if it said the cost of living or CPI or inflation, but didn't hear a lot of that from the officers. And I did ask that directly and didn't get any response back. So I won't support 2, and that's the reason. It's just because we are hearing from developers that it's too expensive to develop, and we're now putting the prices up to make it even worse for them. Thanks.
Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I wonder if you'd permit me a question of our governance team very quickly. I'm just trying to recall when we first approved this, approved our fees and charges earlier in the year. I feel like we put a motion on the table to review the way in which we do that, or something along those lines. Are we currently undertaking a review of how we set our fees and charges?
Yeah, it's true, Mr Mayor. The conversation was about the timing of fees and charges and when you looked at them. So having a look at them alongside operational budgets and the like in that as well.
All right, thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, I agree with Councillor Dennison and Councillor Harpiter, and I won't support recommendation 2, although I would note one of these fees and charges, technical and professional staff from other council units, is proposed to decrease. So if recommendation 2 was to fail, I would move a separate motion to approve just that particular item of decrease there, in fairness. What I would say, and I'd look to the floor for a seconder, is I'd ask for a review in how we set our planning fees and services. If there was, Councillor Naylor's happy to second that. Just because, as Councillor Zabellin's outlined, I don't have confidence in how we've got to these figures. I don't have confidence that we're sitting in the right space. And when you are charging extra $25 just to print and give somebody a certificate because we've just implemented a year-on-year inflation increase, that does feel like we're not doing the process right. And so I'm not judging officers for getting to where we've got to. That has been the process that's been done up until today. But I think if we're not going to support recommendation 2 because we feel we're out of kilter, it's only appropriate that we then look at how we could get ourselves back into kilter. So, yeah, the wording of that would be quite simple, just that we review the way in which we set our planning service fees and charges. You're looking to say something, Mr Mayor?
No, I'm just waiting for you to finish.
Excellent, that's fine. I'd go back to the point that I raised in my questions. I thought I was about to be interrupted to ask questions. So, in that we're looking at charging for a planning service team lead, somewhere around the vicinity of $67 an hour. The other 203 are overheads. That's 3 times the cost that we pay the person who's doing the work. No wonder people in our community feel that we're out of step. I don't know how we can sit here and say that seems reasonable. And if genuinely, because I accept the answer that was given by officers that all we know is the total cost and then we divide that by the hours we charge and therefore that's how we come to the figure. Well, if we're seriously allocating 3 times the overheads versus the staff that are doing it, that becomes a question of A, the way in which we allocate overheads, but B, the overheads that we're charging in this service, because that does seem outrageously more expensive than the cost of doing the work itself. Are we outsourcing a considerable amount of it and therefore that cost is getting put on to it rather than having our staff internally do it, which would be at a much lower rate, which then leads to an overall average rate? I don't know. So I think a review of those fees and charges would be useful in giving us the confidence in these figures. I'm not suggesting I want a radical reduction in the fees that we charge, but I am suggesting I want a robust process in how we come to those fees and charges. So I hope, regardless of whether you'll support recommendation 2, that you would be open to supporting an additional recommendation on reviewing that process.
What I was going to say, Councillor, it's already on the work schedule, obviously, and this is important around our revenue and funding policy, so just be very careful what you do next. All right, our next speaker, Councillor Johnson.
Well, I wasn't expecting that this would be such a debate, I must say, because these fees and charges came to us in February, and I don't recall the significant concerns that are being expressed now being raised then, which is interesting. The timing of the concerns... Sorry, I'm being interrupted.
No, Councillor, you are interrupting here, and it's her right. It is her time to speak.
He's saying point of order.
Thank you. I'm also being interrupted by Councillor Naylor. It'd be nice, colleagues, if we could respect one another when we're speaking. Thank you. We had the opportunity to raise significant concerns earlier in the year. I didn't hear the level of concern that's been expressed now being expressed then. That's the first thing. The second thing to say is that all fees and charges went up. These are only the ones that we have to consult on. Fees and charges like sports fields, swimming pools, health inspections, dog regos, they all went up. What is special about development charges? I don't think that they are in a special category all of their own, where we don't cover those costs from user pays, but we would for some kids' sports team or someone that goes swimming. So the alternative to not charging adequately for these services is that we subsidise these services through rates. And it's interesting that those who have spoken and said that they're not going to support these charges, I don't think any single one of those persons wants to put more on the rates. In fact, many of them are people that have been suggesting further cuts to our budget so that we can reduce rates. So I find that this position is a little bit anomalous. We had a significant increase in performance from the planning team. The timing has gone up from 50% completed on time to 75% completed on time. In a short space of the time, I think that's commendable. And perhaps one point that hasn't really come out well is that the amount of time that staff have to spend on an application is directly proportional to the quality of the application that's put in. If a really good quality application is put in, it doesn't take as much time to approve it. If there are lots of special extra questions that have to be asked or further information that needs to be sought, and the application has to go back and forth, of course that takes more time and it increases the cost and it perhaps adds to delay. This isn't a one-way street. It's not all about, us and our staff. There's the other side of the coin here. It's about the quality of the application that we receive. And finally, I think the Mayor made an extremely valuable point, which is that we don't actually have much easily developable land left in Palmerston North. And that makes all of the applications more complicated and more expensive. I really don't think that there's a strong argument for not doing the CPI increase. The other overheads of council have to be covered. They have to be apportioned out through the user pays, and the alternative is adding more onto rates. And I'm surprised to hear those members not supporting this, because that's the only other option that I see that would be available. So I will be supporting the increase in fees and charges. I think they've gone up across the board in all areas that we charge for to the same percentage, and that seems to me to be perfectly fair.
Councillors, that the microphones are chopping out when you're turning your head, and a button that I've got here, but no, seriously, it's when you turn your head, so just speak into it, otherwise you will be in the red seat and ejected. Councillor Finlay.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I wasn't going to speak on this, but I'm afraid I've been forced to after listening to Councillor Johnston. Are we expensive for developers? Maybe, I don't know. But I do recall one word one of the officers said, and it's the word that rings in my ears. User pays. Because if the user doesn't pay, the ratepayers pay. And I don't think that ratepayers on fixed incomes should be subsidising developers. So I will support this because I do believe it should be user pays. And that's all I wish to say on that point.
Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just, for the purposes of decision-making, had a question, if you wouldn't mind, which is what would happen if we don't approve the fees and charges today? Was that asked? I asked. Sorry, could...
I'll just get somebody to answer that. Again. Cam, you're in the hot seat.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, it's an interesting question. I guess when you think about where we are at with the adoption of the annual budget, what you're effectively going to end up with is more strain on the ability to meet the revenue budget that is in that annual budget, for which you run the real possibility of running a deficit as a result.
And what the implications of running a deficit budget, of making that decision to run a deficit?
So in any given year, the council could have a surplus in which you have a policy for surpluses that goes back against debt repayment. If you run a deficit, you end up effectively having to extract more debt than you would otherwise, and to fund the operations, which we try not to do.
Thank you, Cam. Thanks, Mr. Mayor, and apologies if that had been covered before, but I didn't hear that answer previously. I'm happy to support approving the fees and charges. I'm also happy to support the additional recommendation to review how we get there. I think information that increases the transparency of the decisions that we make in this chamber is generally a good thing, and I'm supportive of that. But in this case, we find ourselves at the death throes of our process for setting this annual budget. And elected members, I know you're all painfully aware of the various levers and opportunities and costs that we've assessed over the last few months in getting to where we are today. Not all of us have liked all of those decisions. Probably around the table, there's not one of us who has liked every decision that we've landed on as we've gone through this process. It's complicated and sometimes it feels counterintuitive. And of course, we would like to reduce fees and charges across the board, maybe not just for our planning community, and Councillor Johnson listed many of the fees and charges that we do approve, have already approved in this process, fees and charges that sit across the range of opportunities and facilities that we provide for our community. Councillor Finlay talked about the principle of user pays, which we do adhere to in how we manage our budget broadly. So, yes, it would be nice to reduce the fees and charges. Yes, I would like to be able to say that to the developers who send me emails. I'm sure many of you would like to be able to say that. But if we say that in this case, then we're saying we're putting more cost on somebody else. And those people haven't had the opportunity to email us about that and say that they don't mind subsidising the planning community and the development community. Thank you. So on that basis, I will approve the fees and charges that's put in front of us today, and look forward to receiving that review of our process for doing that in future.
Thank you, colleagues. Look, just as a right to reply, what we're going to do is we'll vote on 2 first. Yeah. And then we'll do 1 and 3 after that. So just in a catch-all, just in response and right to reply, look, colleagues, we've had this around us for quite a number of months. It does seem a little, well, I do know why this is happening. There's a certain event in October, but we all of a sudden we're getting all quite worried about $1.7 million worth of income, and actually it's a cost of doing business. I have been in the development game, I've run a business, it is a cost of doing business. You just have to accept that. If we want to lower that, we put that on the ratepayer. It's already subsidised, it'll be subsidised even further. So, look, I can understand you all want to have really, really low costs, and we want to beat every development and make sure every development's in town. I'm absolutely with you on that as well. But I just want, in response to a couple of comments, look, the costs have gone up. Staff, you all sat here and wanted to pay staff fairly. We've got overheads to manage. Costs in your own homes have gone up. So please, why are we pinpricking on some of this? the applications that are quality go through well. And I'll give you an example. Our hotel developers complimenting the staff on how actually easily this went through. But actually, theirs was a very, very good quality application. And I think the staff worked through that, and it was quite complex. Look, developers will always lobby. It's part of, I suppose, the game of development. And they'll want to have lower fees, and the people that have submitted are regular submitters. So I've seen these submitters regularly in our chamber, either through their agents or direct. Look, the cost of, I just heard on the radio this morning, the latest market report did show some improvements and some green shoots in our economy. And so to say that we're suffering and you know, we're not going anywhere, I don't think is totally true. So just in response to some of the comments. Also, I don't think that we should be setting overheads as governors. I think that's why we employ a CE. Otherwise, we should be the CE. So just in response to some of the comments there. And look, really, councillors, I think we have to be really, really careful here. If we don't approve this, at the 11th hour, it does become slightly problematic. We'll get through it, but it is problematic, and it does put the cart before the horse in some way. And look, in terms of wanting to sort through this policy, it is on the work schedule. It will be reviewed around the funding and revenue policy. So I won't be voting for that because it's already there, and it will get dealt to. Perhaps not as quick as one or two of you want, but it will get dealt to. So we'll vote on number 2 first, please. There's a bit of Morse code going on over there. And that has passed 11 votes for and 4 against. Okay, we've got 1 and 3, and we'll take those together unless there's somebody who wants them separate. I don't think we need to redebate those, so we'll vote on these, please, 1 and 3. That's passed 15 votes for and none against, thank you. And then we've got the additional... Was there a seconder for that? Councillor Naylor. Councillor, you've spoken to this, so this will be your right to reply. Okay. We will vote on that Chief Executive review. Sorry, I'm getting mixed messages there. All right, so we'll go to Councillor Johnson and Councillor Naylor, and then you can have your right to reply. Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I wonder if we could have a comment from the Chief Executive as to if that recommendation is clear and detailed enough. Because it seems very vague to me.
Through the Mayor, yes, it is rather broad, and how we would set our fees and charges. My view on it is that we would probably need to revisit the revenue and financing policy as well about what the public-private split might be in order to be able to achieve fees and charges. My view is that the team actually do undertake a review every year that comes through this chamber, and that's the opportunity for you to have a look at it. I get the intent of what it is that, and from the commentary that's been made, which is looking at hourly rates and those sorts of things in that as well, which will then feed into things like overheads, but it does somewhat come back to still being able to achieve the revenue target for this activity that's set in the revenue and financing policy.
Okay, thank you. I'm not going to support this because I think it's too vague. It's not going to give, I don't think, elected members the information that I think some of you would like. It's not really, it's much more that this would be addressed through a change of policy through the revenue and financing policy than a report back on how we set fees and charges, because that comes every year before we agree to go out and consult on them, those that have to be consulted on. So I'm not sure, unless the mover wants to change the wording or expand a little bit on what he's hoping to achieve through this, I can't really see that we're gaining anything through it. Thank you.
Councillor Naylor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think when we consult the community on anything, it's really important that we listen to that feedback, and if we feel it's appropriate, we respond to it. One of the things that was raised in the Brian Green submission, which is on page 50 of our agenda, was that section 150 of the Local Government Act 2002 requires that fees must only recover reasonable costs. Now, the issues that have been highlighted in the answers to questions today confirm that our overheads, which have been moved around quite a lot in the last year or so, do form a part of the fees and charges. And for that reason, and the recent understanding that I have been made aware of some of the activities that are incorporated in the overheads, leads me to feel that I would like some reassurance that we are actually meeting our legislative requirements under the Act. And that is something that has been raised through a submission today. It may well be that all of that activity is deemed to be reasonable, but when we're talking about things that are quite outside of planning, such as communications, marketing, the cafeteria, whatever else, I want to know for sure if that is reasonable under the Act. And for that reason, I'm really comfortable to have the Chief Executive review, obviously with some feedback to elected members so that we can gain a better understanding of the makeup of some of those planning services, specifically planning services here. So this is not just the overall review of fees and charges that is on the work schedule. This is specific to planning services. It's for those reasons that I've outlined that I strongly support this, and I think around the table we do have to have a really good understanding of what's contributing to that. The Mayor recently, just before, said, you know, we employ as Chief Executive to determine the overheads, and I 100% agree with that. But as elected members, we need to understand and be comfortable with what is incorporated within that and how that's allocated across activities, particularly when we attribute those to the fees that we require our community to pay for specific services.
To what? Okay, we'll get that in there and you can provide a right of reply. Look, colleagues, a couple of things. I think we've got to understand, just in a couple of the comments that were there, and I wasn't going to comment, but look, you've got to understand governance versus management as well. And if we employ a CEO, it's somewhat undermining and to the officers if we're starting to delve into what is 1% or 2% of our income. I appreciate that there's developers that may be lobbying you or hassling you, but look, there's 600, we consent up to 600 consents a year. We've got 3 submissions talking about this. Do the math yourself. Two of the submitters are regularly in contact with us. They're regularly in contact with me. And it's part of the game. But really, we've already got a revenue and funding policy which we will review, part of the LTP. Now, a couple of you are not happy with what we're doing, and you've clearly identified the reasons why. But we're going to address that. If we start doing this work, it undermines a bit of the other work that's going on. There'll be possibly some levels of service in there that we will have to review as well. If you want to lower fees, somehow somebody's got to pay for that. As Councillor Finlay said, does it go back on the ratepayer? Or do we magic it up some other way? So that might mean levels of service are either adjusted. So it's a bit more than just doing some planning and fees and charges for planning services. There's another bigger game here. So please don't vote for this. We're going to deal with it around our LTP, our revenue and funding policy. There's a clear message here to officers about that some of you are not happy, and I'm probably in that bracket as well, about continually lifting charges. But please don't undermine the officers, let them do their work. Back to you, Councillor, for right of reply.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. It's been an interesting discussion. I'd like to start by saying the revenue and funding policy looks at the percentages that we recover in totality from a particular area of service. And that is an important thing that we look at and review. That is not what we are asking for here, and so I don't see this work on the work schedule. What became very clear from questions from Councillor Sabellin, myself, Councillor Naylor and others, was that when we ask for a breakdown of how we come to the conclusion that it is appropriate to charge $215 for a planning technician, the answer that our officers gave was, well, I don't really know the specifics of why we've got to that figure of that particular level, but what we do know is that we take the overall figure and divide that by the numbers of hours in it. And so what we're asking for here is understanding a breakdown of how we set our fees and charges in this space. I don't think it is fair. I don't even know what the percentages that each of these have been inflated by, or how we came to the conclusion that that was the appropriate percentage to do so. So if you can hand on heart in this chamber say you understand why we're doing this and why this percentage is the way it is, then please don't vote for this. This is not necessarily predetermining that we need to set a lower or a higher or otherwise fee. The question of where was this concern when we set this? Well, we hadn't had submissions at that point which had raised this concern. So I don't think it's fair to suggest I should have had a crystal ball and known that this was going to be a concern that would come through for the community. We had submissions on it. I genuinely don't understand how we've got to the figures that we've got to, and so I think it's fair that we ask for that breakdown. I appreciate the concerns of Councillor Johnson that the word review is perhaps too broad, and so fair enough. I think what we're really looking for is a breakdown of how we get to that. When the Mayor says that some of us are looking for really, really low costs, I'm not looking for really, really low costs. I'm just looking for really, really reasonable costs. And when we know that we're at the top end of these kind of services, I think it's important that we understand why that is and how we've got there. I also agree with Councillor Naylor and the Mayor. It is not our job to set overhead allocation, but it is our job to observe the application of how our decisions and how our plans flow through into the community. And if the application of our overheads is that we are charging 3 times the amount in overheads versus what the wages we pay to a staff member, I think that is a point that we can raise a concern and go, is that right? And can we get an understanding of why that is and where that comes from? If it is as simple as saying, we've taken figure X and inflated it by 2% one year and 2% a year after that and 2% a year after that and 2% a year after that, well then I think it's appropriate that we determine whether or not that has been a fair reflection of where we're at. And certainly the alarm bell is ringing in my head if we are at the upper end of those fees and services, and so I think it's appropriate we get an understanding of that. So this isn't some radical recommendation suggesting that we slash our fees and services charges and put millions of dollars on the rates. As the Mayor said himself, it's 1.7 million. I would imagine if we left the fees where they were at this year, it might be 1.63 million. So we're not talking huge reductions here, but this is really just asking for the information so we can, as this table, get a better understanding of what is a crucial area in our community. The Mayor, you often talk about the dark arts in this chamber and trying to figure out where things come from, and I think there are some dark arts that are going on in this space, and so I would like to understand where that's coming from. So I hope you can see this as a reasonable recommendation to give us some better information.
All right, we will vote, please. Number 4. And that is passed. 9 votes for and 6 against. Okay, we will now break and we'll be back into the chamber at 5 to 11. Thanks. Kia ora tātou, welcome back to our council meeting. And colleagues, we're up to number 11, which is around the 2025-26 annual budget adoption. And I'll invite Cam Mackay, Scott Matzer and Steve Patterson to the table, please. It's page 59 of your papers, councillors.
Kia ora koutou, Mayor and councillors. Pleased here to bring to you the final annual budget for adoption today, and essentially this brings together all of your decisions that you've debated through the deliberations and brings this into a final published document for your consideration of adoption today. Largely, this part of the process now is largely a procedural step. You've done your deliberations and made decisions. This is just bringing those, encompassing them together for the legal adoption. And from which, this point, then the rates are able to be set and so forth. Just one thing I just wanted I just made one brief comment in the paper, which we don't yet know the implications fully of. You'll be aware that coinciding with our process, the government itself has undertaken its own budgetary process and has made some changes along the way. The one that potentially has some impact on us will be the timing of when the KiwiSaver changes are likely to come in, which is from 1st of April next year. It aligns more with the tax year as opposed to our financial year. And just flagging that once we've done our piece of work, there may be a need just to bring back any implications that may or may not have. Other than that, I'm happy to take questions unless others have comments they need to make.
Cool, yeah, just morning all. I just want to chip in and say, as I mentioned late on the meeting of the deliberations, our rates increase was 6.6% subject to being put into the model. That hasn't changed, so our offline model was accurate for that. And as I've always said throughout this process, a big thanks to not only yourselves as elected members, but also the staff around the organisation for getting to this point to be adopting on the 4th of June. Happy for any questions.
Thanks, Cam. Thanks, Scott. Yes, we have some. Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Just a couple of questions. Do you think that the reduction in the OCR will have an impact on how much interest we pay over the next year? Or are we more locked in than that?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I don't see that having a material impact because we do have a mixture of fixed rate swaps. It may have some marginal impact perhaps on new borrowing, but it would be relatively marginal because we take a weighted average interest rate as it is based on the borrowings we currently have.
Okay, no, that's fine, thank you. And then you've just put a comment in here about should issues arise due to the reduction to the professional services budget, a report will be brought back to council. So at this stage, are there any issues anticipated, or is that just a sort of a hedging your bets kind of a statement?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I think the comment was made during the deliberations around that particular item. It is hard to know exactly what the implications could or otherwise might be. There might be none, but I guess if there are requests or need to something comes along the way during the year, there may not be the ability to simply absorb those sorts of things. So in that case, we'd be bringing it back into the chamber for you.
Okay, so there's basically no wiggle room, is what you're saying on that one.
That is my view, yes.
Okay, thank you. Can you just remind us what rates increase was anticipated in this year of the long-term plan before we made the changes to go out on?
Yeah, just confirming that it was 8.9 in the long-term plan.
Okay, so in your opinion, what are the significant changes that have resulted in us being able to reduce the rates by 2.3%?
Probably there's a couple of movements that I'd just highlight. Probably is you've made some decisions along the way around professional services, and I think you made two lots of decisions around that particular budget item, and there was also a reduction in the interest rate assumption, which was previously 5% down to 4.4%. We've also adjusted the opening balance assumptions around what our expected debt position is likely to be to start the financial year, and of course there's also been some changes as a result of changed external funding from NZTA. So that's changed some of the programs for which you're now delivering, but also incorporates some of the elements of that we've previously canvassed around the transport budget that were omitted in the long-term plan. These are now included. So it's been a number of moving parts, but they, in my mind, are probably the things that stand out.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
All right. Councillor Hancock.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Cam, you just mentioned there before the cut in professional services. Are there any implications around that councillors need to be aware of?
Yeah, through Mr. Mayor, again, it's probably one that at this point in time I don't have any that I can share, except to say that I know that it's going to be. The wiggle room is not necessarily there. If something was to arise as the year progresses, that would probably give rise to coming back into the chamber. Whether or not, in some areas, and time will tell, whether or not there are things that may not progress as fast as perhaps what they would otherwise if those budgets were there. That may be an implication, but again, I guess we just have to report back to you as the year progresses if there is anything significant.
Yeah, thank you. So what you're saying there is perhaps some of our consultancy work, which we might require to actually progress various parts of our work, actually might be impacted.
Potentially, but I mean, it's really too early to tell exactly what those implications are. I think your budgets are sufficient for the programs you have, but if there's something that comes along the way that we just don't know today, that will cause some issues. It will just simply bring back into the chamber so that you can make a decision of how to proceed.
Thank you, Cam. Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. All right, colleagues, we'll get the recommendations there if there's no other questions. Thank you, gentlemen. So we've got three recommendations to Council. It's a Council adopting the annual budget plan for 25-26 as amended to incorporate item 8 as attached, and that's just including the turf motion that we voted for just previously. Number 2, that Council confirm the adoption of the annual budget plan 2025-26 is a significant decision within the parameters of the Local Government Act, and that council is satisfied that all submissions have been considered and that there has been compliance with the decision-making and consultation requirements of the Act. Number 3, that council delegate authority to the Chief Executive to authorise payments to council-controlled organisations and other external organisations in accordance with their respective service level agreements. So, look, I'm happy to move that, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. Colleagues, look, firstly, thank you for what has been a pretty thorough annual budget deliberations. We don't normally go through this amount of rigour, but there was some angst from the community around us continuing some projects, but also around, obviously, cost pressures. I would call this a balanced budget in the sense that we have listened and we have reprioritised. But I just want to put it out there, there'll be some leagues tables come out around councils in the next couple of weeks, which you're all aware of from the government, and we will certainly be amongst one of the lower of those in terms of our rates at 6.6. But as I said, it's around running a true budget too, so we're not running a deficit as some others will be, and we're certainly funding depreciation as well. But we're still keeping the city moving, and renewals and looking after our assets is probably the number one thing that we do. There are a small amount of community facilities that our community has advocated for, and around Arena, Te Matapatoa and the Pacifica Hub. And we've seen the community well and truly in the chamber supporting those. But I do also understand the call to look at rates as well and balance those with some really feeling the pinch and the cost of living. On the positive side, good to see this morning with the market lead around the economy and the green shoots starting to appear. It will still take some time, but as Palmerston North does have a diverse economy, I think that will serve us very well. So again, thank you to the staff for a huge amount of work in the background, and I think we've done the community proud in the sense that we've listened to all that we could, but also to keep the city moving ahead. So thank you. Councillor McLeod.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I rise to actually support or speak in favour of the recommendation before us. For starters, I just want to thank our staff for their diligent work throughout this process, and also throughout the consultation process, actually. And also I want to thank submitters for the range of feedback and solutions or ideas that they provided to us throughout this process as well. And lastly, I just want to thank also my council colleagues also for the very respectful debates and civil debates that have taken place around the council chamber. I did actually enjoy this process, actually, funny enough, compared to other annual budgets. One thing that I probably wanted to highlight was the following. I've really enjoyed this process as we continue to ignite the old age debate of between investing, to improve services, service delivery and community well-being, and also reducing costs to minimize rates. While I understand or acknowledge some of that there is considerable financial pressures on households and organizational businesses, with mortgage rise and the price of other goods and services rising, I'm very much comfortable also with where we've landed as a council. I think we've done a good job of culling certain programs or deferring certain programs as well to make sure that we are able to achieve that affordability that ratepayers are also looking for. So we've come from 8.9 from the long-term plan and to the 7.7 which was consulted on. And then we've managed to reduce it to 6.6, which is what we're actually striking today. I think one thing that I also want to highlight, as probably many of us, or many will be watching today, or we will be hearing or reading from the newspaper, I just want to highlight my positions and why I voted a certain way, or why I also didn't vote certain ways. In making these budgetary considerations, I think the focus for me was personally, was largely around striking the balance between affordability and the need to provide essential services and improving our city. And I've noted a lot has been made, especially around, a lot of comments have been made around the rate rises and that sort of thing. I just want to highlight one thing to the community, that we do not raise rates for the sake or for the fun of raising rates. The council is not immune to some of the unpredictable effects of the global economic downturns caused by the trade wars currently happening as well, and construction and supply chain issues, increases in skill shortages, and also increase in interest rates, although it's coming down, and also interest rates on our debt. The cost of living has been biting, and interest rates have been hiking, and central government reforms and all those stuff, and the need to improve the resilience of our infrastructure has actually put pressure on the council. And so those are some of the reasons why some of the rates are going up, for those that are asking why rates are going up, because we've had the opportunity to actually talk to a lot of community groups who have taken us on coffees and asked us why rates are going up and that sort of thing. So those are some of the reasons why rates have been rising to rising to 6.6 today. So I just want to highlight to the community that the council is not immune to some of the cost pressures that the council, that the council is facing. And for me personally, it was about striking a balance between affordability and providing quality services to the community. On that basis, I'm happy to support the recommendation before us, and I'm very happy with where we landed. I understand that from the philosophical perspective, there will be some that will say that we should have gone lower, or there will be some that say that we should have cut more services. But personally, I'm happy with where we've landed, and I'm happy to support what we have in front of us today. Thank you.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, colleagues. I'm not standing for mayor, but I did want to just reflect a little bit on the budget cycle that we've been through, and kind of casting around on what might I use by way of a word to describe this budget cycle. And I think the one that I've been able to land on is challenging. I have found it quite challenging indeed, in dimensions that we have not been challenged for some time. Ultimately, I do think, though, we've struck a good balance between the investment needs that are on the one hand and our commitments to affordability and value on the other. So just around affordability, rates are less than 3% of average household income and far less than 1% of property value. And I'm of the view that that means they are indeed affordable across the city, especially when we note that there are hardship grants available. And in terms of value, it is less than $5 a resident a day. You think about all we get for less than $5 a resident a day. I'd say that's quite good value for money, and in fact, essential investment that keeps council here for our residents, meeting the environmental, cultural, social needs, and enabling the near $7 billion city economy. Can also support this budget because we've been through quite indeed a robust process, out with an 8.9, a lot of hard work from officers and around this table to hit 7.7, feedback from community, and yes, a further lot of work that took us to 6.6. I'd say, though, that even the 6.6 you'd want to reflect. The reality is that the residential rate average starts with a 2, not a 6. And so there's some truths within the overall headline that we do need to reflect on in terms of where we've been able to respond to concerns that we've heard from residents around affordability. I must say I was a little bit surprised by some of the last minute cuts that came through. It was all well within process, but some of those proposals that came through for quite deep cuts, especially around community and environment related matters, were a bit of a surprise, but was really heartened and quite moved by the swift, strong response that we got from the community that actually saw those investments defended. And hopefully that sends quite a clear and quite a strong message to future councils about the value of those particular parts of our budget. I think what we're doing is still ultimately creating a budget that is catching up. I think the reality is when you look around the city, investment has been far too low for far too long. And it's pretty obvious when you actually look around the city in terms of some of the tired and overstretched assets that are out there, and in terms of some of the strain that we see in terms of social cohesion in the community as well. So I think this sets us up quite well, and I thank officers for their work and colleagues for their work as well to get us to this point to strengthen our city's future. And while I'd say this budget isn't perfect, it does go some way to closing key gaps in renewals and maintenance, keeps development moving, and sustains essential community-facing investment, including new facilities, as well as grants and services. So this does have my strong support. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Naylor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think it was Councillor Bowen that earlier mentioned that through this annual budget process, there's probably not one single one of us who are happy with every single decision that's been made. I think when we come to this point, I reflect on the process and where we've landed and have to ask myself the question, am I in a position to be able to support this as a whole? I also just want to acknowledge the huge amount of work that has gone in by officers and colleagues to get where we are, and certainly 6.6% is better than 8.9 as we had outlined in our long-term plan. However, I don't believe 6.6 is what our community were asking for in the significant feedback both last year and this year. In terms of the pleas that we heard from our community who are struggling in this current economic environment, those people asked us to stick to basics and hold off big projects for now. Some of those people did support some of those projects, but they simply said we can't afford them now. I really appreciate the work the officers did a couple of weeks ago in providing us some options to bring the capital program down a little bit, and most of those was to spread that over perhaps a longer period of time and stage it in a way that would be more deliverable. I don't think there were any big projects that were actually deferred or removed in a significant way as a result of those, but we did bring the capital program down to 97 million. And reflecting on the capital new and growth aspect of that, which is now 63, and looking at where we're delivering in the current year, which at 10 months is 25.9 million for our capital new and growth, even if we got at a year end to say 35 million, we're talking about a 70 to 80% increase in the capital new growth space. Now, the reason that I really do focus on the capital program and particularly the new growth and that aspect which is debt funded is the impact of the size of that program on this year has some negative impact on the fact that we're needing to put rates up, but the impact on the following year as next year is around 3 times that which we're having to put rates up for this year. So that size of that capital program is not just reflected in the rates increase this year, it's committing us to an additional level of increase next year that I feel uncomfortable with until we've actually seen a real turn in terms of the economic environment. I also look at the aspects of the budget that have elected member input versus the ones that don't have elected member input. And certainly there's been things that are outside of our control that have had positive and negative impacts. And I mean, examples of that is the $2.9 million lower that we're having to budget for interest. But in terms of our operational expenses, we've added 2.8 million over and above what was committed in our long-term plan. And when I look at things like that, I'm simply not comfortable that we're responding adequately to the community who are asking us to pull back on some of those expenses. So where we've landed, whilst I'm acknowledging it as an improvement on where we started, I simply can't support where we've got to. So I won't be supporting this budget for these recommendations in front of us today.
Councillor Finlay.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. On behalf of all the older people who are living on superannuation in Palmerston North and all the other people who are on fixed income, thank you all to every one of the councillors for bringing the rates down to 6.6%. I know rates are going to be a lot higher in places like Auckland, Wellington and Dunedin. Rates in the councils around us are going to be higher than us. So to have it at a 6.6 is not acceptable, but bearable. Fortunately, Grey Bear has been very busy with government and advocating for higher rates rebate, which is coming in this year, which is going to help ease that pain a little bit for people on super. This process has been an interesting one. I've watched councillors over a few years fight for their pet projects, but this time I can't remember any pet project really coming through, because I feel that every councillor here understood how people on fixed incomes can be affected so much. We've heard comments in the past about, oh, it's only a couple of loaves of bread. That affects people on low income, believe me. But I haven't heard anything like that this time. And I've seen a real effort in this council to do something about the level of rates. And I think, on behalf of older people particularly, I'd like to thank this council for coming to 6.6.
Councillor Bowen.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Thanks, colleagues. I think we got to the end of this, and this isn't about numbers on a page anymore. It's about the rigorous debate that got us here, from us all, from the staff, and having heard from our community. And recognising, as Councillor Finlay's just said, that we've done this in face of real financial pressures. Families, businesses, individuals across the community feeling the impact of inflation, of rising costs, and a great demand on core services, the services that enable people to survive and thrive in difficult times. So yes, I think we've all put our shoulder to that wheel, and every dollar that we spend, I certainly can say, hand on heart, is working harder than ever before. And despite that, I'm really proud that we've maintained our commitment to investing in community facilities and also investing in the renewals that the Mayor talked about earlier, that our infrastructure will stop going backwards and start going forwards as we tackle depreciation through renewals. Because we know that that investment isn't a luxury, that's vital. It's vital for our infrastructure. Our investment in community facilities is vital for the social threads that hold our community together, whether that's a place for kapahaka or a place for cricket, whether it's the places where we learn, where we connect, where we socialise. Those places are really important in our community, and we would be poorer without them. But getting to this point hasn't been easy. There's been robust debate about priorities, trade-offs, timelines. There's been questions and challenge. There's been raised voices. There's been heated arguments sometimes. But that's what accountability demands, I think, and we've served our community in that. We haven't debated in a vacuum. We've listened to our community. And the community activism did not go unnoticed, whether that was submissions to the process, whether that was turning up in the chamber with a sign, whether that was just nobbling your elected member in the supermarket aisle. You've made it clear across the process that you care deeply about the future of this city, and I'm really grateful for that on all sides of the debate. And I say all sides quite deliberately, because this isn't binary. I think, as Councillor Naylor has said, some people wanted reduced rates and also wanted additional projects. And we hear that time and time again. It's too easy to slip into the language of nice to have, because nice to have is different for every single member of our community. And that, for me, is a rigour that we need to bring to our listening and to our debate. So for those in the community, in our community organisations, those individuals in the supermarket who pushed us to do better, thank you for that challenge. I don't pretend this budget support will solve everything, or that we won't do it all again next year, whoever's around this table. But the budget we've got today reflects our shared values, our constraints, and I feel our collective aspiration to build strong, inclusive and resilient communities. So thank you, colleagues, thank you, staff, for the passion and the investment in this process that brought us to today. Thank you to the community for holding us to account, whatever your views are. Thanks for walking alongside us along this very long journey that's brought us to today. It's not enjoyable. It's hard work, but it's the job that we're here to do, and I'm grateful to do it with people who are committed to the best outcomes for this community.
Councillor Isabella.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Excuse me. Won't repeat what I've said on this topic in previous debates, but those points are all still true. I can hand on heart say that this is a thoroughly tested budget. Absolutely. What I do want to add, though, is a very sincere acknowledgement to our staff and our officers. I have heard a lot of feedback from the community who attended the deliberations, and there were a lot of them, and they were so impressed with how credibly and competently you performed in the chamber. Whilst some were engrossed in watching the theatre of the debate, you were also under scrutiny and you just nailed it. I think you're an absolute credit to our council. So thank you very much.
You've jumped in, Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was just listening and thinking. I think I want to start by saying thank you to staff, because throughout this I really feel that staff have given us excellent information. They've responded quickly. They've been on top of their game, and particularly want to single out Scott and Cam, who I think have done an excellent job. Also want to thank the general public, those who submitted on the draft, those who came in to speak to us, those who came to the chamber for the deliberations and emailed their elected members. I think it showed that people do really care about their community. They do really care about what services council provides. So I think, as others have said, that was very heartening actually, and quite encouraging, I thought. I agree with those who've said that this is a balanced approach. We have agreed to reductions in budgets. We have agreed to defer projects. But I think we've done so while retaining the vision that we set out in the long-term plan. And to me, that's important because the community expects, when we consult on the long-term plan, that that is our vision for the next 3 years at least, and that the annual budgets will just be smaller adjustments on that, that there won't be a significant change of direction in an annual budget. So I think it's important that council is predictable to people, and that when there's a long-term plan consultation and an agreed plan forward, that we do stick to that vision. I think that that's very important. There were real community projects on the line in this budget. I'm not going to resolve from that. There were. Not all of them were brought up to the table, but those that were around community funding, they were around funding to museums, they were around climate change, they were around community events. So those things I felt the community made it clear that they didn't want those particular projects to be reduced after consultation had already been done. And I really was quite uncomfortable with the process and I concede that it was perfectly allowable. But I was really unhappy with the process that allowed significant reductions in what had been consulted on to come to the table on the day of deliberations. And I do think that that's something that we need to look at as a council, whether or not we continue with that option going forward. Couple of things that I was quite happy about that we were able to change. One in particular, where I did agree with Councillor Wood, and there weren't many such occasions, was the ability to give some relief to the rural ratepayers, who I thought put a very strong case forward for not having the percentage of rates that they pay increase as significantly as was planned. And as well as that, I'm happy that we've got an increase in the percentage of rates that's being paid on capital value. And Councillor Barrett mentioned something that I was also going to mention, which is when you look at the average rates increase, and I understand that averages, cover a lot, but still, got to take it from somewhere. The average single residential rates increase, by my calculation, is around 2.2%, which works out to, I think, $76 a year, less than $1.50 a week. And I think that that is not an unreasonable increase given all of the work that council does. So, not all of us were really happy with everything that went through, that's for sure, one way or another. But I think that we got sufficient messages from the community about what was important to them that we've landed in a reasonable place. So thank you, colleagues, for your input. I think it's valuable that we hear all views, whether we agree with them or not. But I also think it's important that at the end of the day, we all have a spirit of compromise. And I certainly voted for deferrals and for reductions in budgets that I wasn't 100% comfortable with, but which I felt were necessary to reduce rates down to the 6.6. So thank you for your work, everyone, and let's see if we're around to do it again next year.
Councillor Harpiter.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Very happy to support a 6.6 and along the lines of Councillor Finlay, I think that people out there are struggling and they'll really appreciate it being at 6.6 when you compare it to a lot of other councils that will be a lot higher than that. I want to take my hat off to the Chief Executive because I think under his leadership, it's his team that's got it to where it is today. So thank you very much for everything that you have done to get your team to where it's got to. I want to say a couple of words. I was disappointed that it got to the community that we were potentially shutting libraries. And as far as I was concerned, that was nonsense. And it shouldn't have ever got out there that we were potentially shutting libraries when that nonsense got out to the community. I was very disappointed that that sort of rubbish got out to the community when, as far as I was concerned, there was no recommendations for that to actually be out there. And that sort of miscommunication to our community is disappointing because we are open and honest to our community and we say that sort of rubbish and that stuff comes out to our community, and it shouldn't, because we should be open and honest about what we are actually doing and not spreading rumours and gossip. So that's what I'm just trying to say, is I'm trying to be open and honest. As far as I'm concerned, it was never ever there. Thank you.
Councillor Arnott.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. There's a lot of people patting themselves on the back in this room right here, right now, and I don't feel that way, to be honest. And a lot of the community that's talked to me is struggling. A lot of people haven't been able to afford to pay their rates, and that's disappointing. I'd like to apologise to the community, apologise for a 6.6 rates rise, apologise it's not lower. So I don't like paying higher rates any more than the next person, and I would like to see a city that makes do with what we've got and uses what we've got a lot more wisely. You'll be pleased to know I'm not standing for mayor this year, but I will be standing as a councillor again, and hopefully the city thinks they've done a pretty good job in the last 3 years, and time will tell. Thank you.
Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Councillor Arnold. I'm also not standing for mayor. Just to put it on. No, I won't be, I can assure you of that, Councillor Michelard. I want to start with the positives and say a 2.3% reduction from 8.9 works out to $3.147 million of lower rates revenue required from this community. And that is to be commended, and I thank our staff, I thank other councillors in the spirit of compromise for getting to that point. However, I do not believe that is enough to respond to what our community asked us for. How I would describe this budget is uneven, if I'm being completely frank. If we look in the table provided in our next item, it shows I worked out all of the averages across all of our different areas. At its lowest, the non-residential quartile 1, rates decrease by 0.1%. At its worst, our miscellaneous average increased by 33.1%, with most of our rural and semi-service rates increasing by at least 17.5%, but many above 19 or 20%. This was mitigated in part, yes, by not changing the rural differential. I thank councillors for that. But I do not believe, when you're also seeing the average non-residential rate increase at 8.6, all ratepayers in our community matter. The residents who live in the country, the residents who work and operate businesses, the residents who might operate in the miscellaneous space. And so I think we have done a better job than nothing, and I thank councillors for that. But when only 10 of the 23 reduction recommendations put up got across the line, and only 2 of the operational reduction recommendations got across the line, which have the maximum impact in this given year, I don't believe we have gone far enough. I think it would be useful to clear the air, and I've been considering about when would be the appropriate time to do this around the community libraries question. I want to be very clear. A submitter came into this chamber and said, could you look at consolidating 2 of our community libraries into the Central City Library? I thought that was an interesting question. And so, when I was putting my ideas on paper, I put that question to it. And I asked the question officers, what is the operating cost of those libraries? Now, if it had come back that they were at $500,000 each, and that it would be a saving of $1 million to defer it, perhaps that could have been a conversation worth having. The answer came back, it was $150,000 plus staff, so you might say $300,000 for the 2 of them. Very low cost compared to what I had considered might have been. And so the idea went no further than that. But if the suggestion in this chamber truly is that we cannot ask questions on points that are raised by submitters and get an understanding of that information, then I don't know what we are here for. I have no problem with any councillor in this chamber going to the community and saying, a question has been asked about how much it costs to operate those community libraries. Make sure you let your elected members know how much you value them. I have absolutely no problem with that. What I do have a problem with is when I get hundreds of emails from people who apparently know what I'm proposing before I know what I'm proposing, saying I have been told that this recommendation is coming. So I just think it's really important I'm clear. I'll put my hand up. That was me. I asked the question in response to the submissions. But no, when the response came back from officers at how low that cost would be, it went no further. So I hope that we're really clear on that, because I think it was made very clear by our community the interest they have in the topic. And I think it was very fair that they came into the chamber to express that, but I think it is a shame that they perhaps had slightly the wrong idea of what was coming. On the question of process, I think it is completely appropriate that councillors bring whatever recommendations they feel fit based on the submissions that they hear. And I make no apology for proposing or seconding a number of submissions in that regard. And I think Councillor Johnson raised a genuine question. If we are, as a collective, not happy with that process, that councillors can bring recommendations to the chamber on the day or the day before, as those recommendations were sent, then we need to have a serious conversation at the start of the next council term as to what our standing orders say. Because I'm not going to apologise for doing what is allowed within the process of this council. But if we're not happy with that process, then we need to have an adult and serious conversation about changing it. And I accept that if that's the will of the room. But overall, I don't think we have gone far enough. The comment was made that we shouldn't, some councillors think we should have cut more services. We haven't cut any services. We haven't even made minor reductions to any services, bar $100,000 for the catering. We couldn't even get the innocuous change of reducing our marketing spend by $200,000 across the line. And so, in that light, I don't think that we have done enough to respond to the community, and I won't be supporting the budget.
Councillor Mann.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I wasn't going to jump in, but I thought I might as well join the parade. I think 6.6 is very good, just like everybody has, and I must commend Wade, the CE, and staff, because they led the charge on that. They led the charge on bringing it down right at the start. And but I don't feel that elected members felt the same about doing their part of bringing it down. And 6.6 is really good compared to 8.9 or whatever it was. But I've heard how it's such a little cost to our ratepayers each week or each day or each year or however they work out their stats. But to some of those ratepayers, that cost is still far too much when it's added up. We've heard the loaf of bread scenario, we've heard all the other things. The facts are some people are really, really struggling. Really struggling. And to put a couple of dollars on their rates a week is enough to tip them over the edge. And we need to think of that. And there was things that we could have cut back on, more things we could have cut back on and brought it down a little bit more. That might have just made them scrape through. Might have been able to give their kids a lunch instead of relying on the government to pay for their lunch. Just little things can make a big, big difference. And I don't think we made a big enough difference, so we should stop patting ourselves on the back. Okay? Got to learn to live within your means. Thank you.
All right, colleagues. I wasn't going to actually do a right of reply, but you've all brought up little things. Like, so, for some councillors, the LTP is the guiding document of where you do things. It's where you change levels of service, councillor. It's where you make some major decisions. Actually, some councils, including a lot of cities, didn't even go out to consult in their annual plan process. So I think we will have a serious discussion about that, because I found it quite clumsy, to be honest, to bring things at the 11th hour with one submitter saying they would prefer to close libraries or do something different. Look, we can all skew the figures. There's a revaluation which nobody's spoken about. So we could have put up 0% rates and the rates still go up in some places 20 or 30% because their revaluation of their land. That's a fairly significant omission there. But look, thank you again to the staff. I was on the end of some emails and some correspondence at 11 o'clock at night because there was the amount of last minute motions or recommendations of cutting. And there's nothing wrong with that. There was a lot of work in the background to understand what that actually did mean. So I know some of you feel that you didn't get exactly what you wanted, but I think Councillor Johnson made the comment about compromise, and I'm saying that to you all here now. There was compromise given, and from me as well. And I do want to thank you all for that, because genuinely you all did participate in some way in that. And I do hope that you can all support this. I think it's quite odd that people take a stance that they don't want to support a budget because politically, for whatever reason, that they think this is just too high. There's been some comments around what rates should be. I get the comment all the time from business people, why aren't you at CPI? Well, we aren't a business. We invest in people. We invest in facilities and some business activities, but we're not a business and we can't do the CPI stuff. It's not as blunt as that. So I do want to acknowledge that 6.6 is, I think, has been quite balanced. And I do want to say thank you again to everybody that's participated. The hard work starts at the end of this month to deliver on that 2025-26 year of council work. And look, we'll still be seeking efficiencies. It's not as if it's a target. A lot of our budgets are QS'd and the staff look for efficiencies where they can, and we try and get that best balance of that investment. But I just want to say there is investment in people here too. If we don't invest in community facilities, who's going to do that? The government? Some community groups? I don't think so. And that's just not the current government, that's all governments. So council, unfortunately, is the last man or woman standing at times, and we just have to stand up for our community. So there is balance in that argument. It's not all just about money. So as a former business person and somebody that's been elected on a business platform, I do understand that. So again, that compromise, that understanding of where things are at. So please, I urge you to support this, and I do hope that we have a unanimous decision around the table. Look, we act here, we serve all ratepayers of Palmerston North, just not little sectors. So please, I ask for your full support and we will vote. Thank you. And that is passed, 11 votes for and 4 against. All right, we'll move through to number 12, and this is on page 63 of your papers. This is around setting the rates the 2025-26 year, and I'll invite Steve Patterson up to present.
Yeah, Mr Mayor and councillors, you've had a good discussion in the last item about the rates and where you've ended up, but this is the formal step that's required to set the rates, it's called these days, and enable us to then assess them against the individual properties so that the rates can be sent out and paid, and the things that you have approved through the budgets can actually be achieved. So it's a very formal statement of what needs to be done, and it reflects the material that's in the annual budget that you've just adopted.
Thank you, Steve. Question from Councillor Naylor.
Thanks, Steve. Just looking at the clause 2.13 on page 68, that is the comments about the government's rates rebate scheme for residential homeowners. It's talked about what's been received, to date in the last year. It said that the government updates the qualifying criteria for this by a CPI adjustment, and I'm just wondering what the current, or what's the criteria going to be in the coming year for people to be eligible for that?
I don't have those figures with me, but the government has announced in the last couple of weeks some changes. They've updated by sort of a CPI adjustment the qualifying levels for income, and the amount of the maximum rebate has gone up a small amount for those who would qualify in the normal course, but also they've extended the scheme this year for, as far as superannuitants are concerned. So superannuitants will have a qualifying income level of up to, it's a bit over 45,000 from memory. So that's quite a bit higher than the 30-something thousand that is the standard limit for people. So I expect there'll be significantly increased numbers of people who will qualify for some or a significant rebate as a result of that change. The figures that we've got in the current year are almost identical to what was the case in the previous year in terms of numbers and amounts. So, if we'd just had a change in the CPI rate, I'd have expected roughly similar amounts again in this coming year. But because of the movement upward in the threshold, the income threshold for superannuitants, there will be quite a number more.
Thank you. And the 1.53 million, does that go directly from the government to the council, or does it go directly from the government to the ratepayer for those that are eligible?
It comes to the council, processes the applications on behalf of the government, it gives the rebate to the people, and then we get reimbursed from the government to the council. So
do we effectively just charge those ratepayers that much less?
Correct. Oh, well, we charge them the amount in a minute and then give them a sort of a rebate showing on the bill for the amount that they qualify for.
Okay, and in what way do we promote or advertise this?
The rebates?
Yeah.
Through all our publications at the times when we issue the bills. With the changes and the increases this year, we'll talk with our comms staff about how we make that clearer to people as well.
And is there any way that we can assess whether how many of those who might be eligible are actually accessing it?
Very difficult to do that. There have been attempts made in the past to get a feel for that. We don't really know. The best we can do is to try to send as much information as we can out to people with the bills
Okay, thank
make
you.
them-
Just did have a second questions around the chart on page 65 with the average of the different sectors, including single residential, etc. I was interested to note the rural and semi-service between 0.2 and 5 hectares was still a 19.3% increase, despite the fact that we didn't progress the change in the percentage of discount that they get.
Yes.
So am I correct to understand that that 19% increase is purely to do with, I mean, aside from the 6.6% rates increase, obviously, is that just purely to do with the valuation of their land versus with the move towards capital?
It's mainly to do with the movement in their values compared with the others. So they in broad terms, didn't go down as much as others. In some cases, they held their values, or a few actually increased their values. So, for that reason, that's flowing through to them.
And do you recall what the percentage increase was going to be for that sector prior to us changing that policy around the discount?
Yes. There was some up to around 30%, but that you've reduced that with two things. One, the change, no change to the surcharge, if you like, and the second being the overall rates increase.
Yeah. Okay, that's all for me. Thank you.
Councillor Isabella.
Thank you. Thanks, Steve. I was just looking on page 72 with paragraph 1.4 and 1.5, which relate to section 16 of the Act for water supply rates and wastewater disposal rates. And I was just wanting to know that I know that the Act provides for the charging for separately rated units that aren't connected. Do we habitually charge for those, such as a sleep out that isn't connected to any water network?
Well, sleep out's a different thing. If we're talking about properties that are connected, then that means the whole of that property is connected to the water network. So whether there's a sleep out or something else there, that's not, I guess, being a separate charge per se. If it's separately occupied by someone other than a family member, and the sleep out is something that is more than just a single, it's a standalone unit of some sort, then that will get a multiplier. But in some cases, if it's just, you have to make a judgment call about the different ones as to whether how they're treated.
Right, so it's for a separately used or inhabited part of a residential rating unit, which is not connected. And so do we habitually, or it's not habitually, it's a judgment call?
Well, no, we will charge those routinely as separately units if that is the case, if that's the way they're being used.
And is the ratio for the charge set in legislation, or have we set that as half price?
We set that. It used to be set in the legislation donkeys years ago that it was a half of what the other rate is, but most councils have continued using that half as a reasonable proxy for the relationship between the cost of actually servicing, because a big part of the cost is actually having the networks in the ground, and, despite no water being delivered.
Okay, thank you. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Steve. All right, councillors, we've got the setting of the rates for the 2025-26 recommendations to council. One, that council adopt the resolution to set the rates for the 25-26 year, attachment 1. And 2, that council note the setting of the rates is a significant decision within the parameters of the Local Government Act, and that it is satisfied there has been compliance with the decision-making and consultation requirements of the Act. I'm happy to move that, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. Colleagues, this is a follow-on, obviously, from just before, so it is part of the process. So I'm happy to move this, and just noting that around the rates, some of the questions around rates rebates, I do know that aged concern, and I think even Councillor Finlay may correct me if I'm wrong, but Grey Power and our council networks certainly promote and push the rebate scheme. I do myself, in some of the columns that I write, whether it's the Ashurst side of things or even any other mainstream media. So it's interesting. A lot of people do access it. I mean, I do a weekly Meet the Mayor session downstairs, and I see a lot of people come through with their rates rebate, looking for their rates rebate. So, and in some ways, that's quite a good thing in connection with council as well. So we can't forget the revaluation, which has gone unnoticed. I shouldn't say has gone unnoticed, but it hasn't had as much conversation in this chamber as it has in the past, because it had some quite big swings a few years ago, but it does seem to have settled down. The rural residential part, I know parts of the city have changed quite significantly, and other parts have actually gone the other way. So it has fallen unevenly, but we've noted that in some of the documentation we've seen. Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. I just want to add a few further comments to the previous item. I think one of the really positive things I think in this item is outlined in the graphs in 2.8, where we're doing the next third or third of the 50% move towards a more weighting on the capital value, and I think that is an overall a positive thing. So I'm pleased to see that component that is based on the capital value shrinking a little bit more as compared to this year, and we'll look forward to next year when that shrinks again. And acknowledging those other two main drivers for rates changes, being the revaluations and the change to the land value and capital value, those are two factors that I also consider when I'm thinking about the rates. For me, it's not just about a 1% being 6.6. It's about what is the overall impact. And whilst I'm pleased with the change to the capital value, land value split, I do acknowledge that there will be members in our community who are also negatively affected whilst we make that change. The Mayor in the previous item also said that we serve all ratepayers, not just certain sectors. And I do want to acknowledge that in the chart on 2.7, the fact that there are some sectors, such as the non-residential commercial, with an average of 8.6% increase, and some that are 19% or 33%. I know it was very convenient for a member to just quote the 2.2 for the residential in the previous item, but I don't want it to go unnoticed that the overall impact of the decisions we're making to some of those sectors will be incredibly difficult. And that is part of the reason that I have fundamentally strongly believe that in a year following evaluation and in a year where we're changing the structure to our rates significantly in this way, that we need to actually consider a lower overall rates increase to soften the impact of those other changes. So once again, in being consistent with the previous item, I won't be able to support this these recommendations for those reasons.
Well, colleagues, I do advise you to support this. If you don't support this, you put us in quite a sticky point. And I just want to acknowledge we have zero influence over revaluations, and to consider that we may have, I think we can't. We do have no influence over that, regardless of whether we lower the rates that year or not. So I push back on a few of those comments. Anyway, we will vote. And that is passed, 12 votes for and 3 against. All right. We now come to number 13, and this is around resolution to authorise the borrowing, and I'll invite Steve Patterson back to the chair again, and that is on page 77 of your papers. Steve. So one, Council authorise the Chief Executive to borrow in accordance with the delegated authority up to 49 million term the borrowing of additional term debt by way of bank loan or loans or credit facilities or other facilities, or the issue of stock for the borrowing secured by the debenture trust deed. 2, that council note the purpose of the borrowing is the carrying out or continuing of programs identified in the 25-26 annual budget. 3, that the council note that any sums raised and subsequently on lent to the Palmerston North Airport Limited pursuant to the loan agreement between the council and the company will be in addition to the sums to be raised for council's own funding purposes as authorised above. 4, the council note that the security for the borrowing may be the charge over rates under the debenture trust deed if the chief executive considers appropriate. 5, that council approve that having regard to the council's financial strategy, it is prudent and reasonable to enter into the proposed borrowing for the reasons set out in this report. Number 6, that council note the raising of the borrowing will comply with the council's liability management policy. And finally, 7, that council note the decision to borrow up to 49 million is a significant decision within the parameters of the Local Government Act and is satisfied there has been compliance with the decision-making and consultation requirements of the Act. I'm happy to move those, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. Councillors, this is again necessary because of the programs we have in place. And I'm comfortable of where we are at with things, bearing in mind it is slightly less than what we had originally looked at doing. So I do hope that we do get, in some of these motions, that we do get a unanimous support. So I ask you to support it, please. Councillor Naylor, you've just jumped in.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm sorry to disappoint you, but I won't be able to contribute to a unanimous support for this. I mean, this is one of the aspects of the budget that I struggle with the most. What is driving our need to borrow up to 49 million, such a large portion of those activities are in that strategic or optional category that our community has pleaded with us to actually consider staggering those. The Mayor talked about investing in community facilities. That's one of the examples. Why would we, at a time such as this, when our community is struggling, to do 3 or 4 facilities all at once, would we not say, let's do this one and then let's do the arena or whatever else, perhaps in another year or 2? But why are we trying to do so much all at once? It just makes no sense, and I just think it's tone deaf to what the community's asked us. So there's just no way that I can support this level of borrowing.
Councillor Johnson.
I do think we have to be very careful when we're throwing around phrases like this isn't what the community wants. Yes, there were a couple of hundred submissions from people, and yes, a proportion of those asked us to reduce spending or defer projects. There were way more people than that that actually turned up to the deliberations meeting, let me point out, in support of community facilities. But despite that, sorry, am I being interrupted again over there? Thank you, Councillor Mann. Despite that, it would never occur to me to stand up and say, the whole community wants this, or our community is asking us to do that. Some people, yes. A small number, yes. Not the majority, by any means. And we hear... Sorry, Councillor Mann, did you have an interjection? Mr Mayor,
Sorry,
I do find it rude
councillors, please, Councillor Mann, please, you're next in line. Well, somebody said something over there. So please, if we can just keep that side of the room quiet, the other councillor is speaking. Carry on, councillor.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I just think we have to be careful making sweeping statements about what the community wants. It's not clear that there's general consensus within the community. Some people want one thing, some people want another thing. And I think that's reflected around the council table, where some of us want one thing, some of us want another thing. And that's why I say we've ended up having to compromise, where none of us feels particularly happy. But I think trying to claim the moral high ground in these sorts of debates and saying, well, you know, the community wanted this and we haven't listened, I just find that unacceptable. So I think it's important to put the other point of view that yes, some people wanted us to defer projects. Yes, some people wanted us to cut rates. Some people also wanted us to continue with what we said we would do in the long-term plan. Some people also wanted us to continue with the investments that we said we would make in community. So I understand that there's not agreement around the table about how to go forward, but let's not pretend that the community said one thing and we did another thing, because that just isn't the case.
Now, Councillor Mann.
Amazing how some people comment, and there's all sorts of allegations thrown out. I just wanted to stand up and touch on the fact of the different views from the different parts of the community as well. But some of the games that were played, I think, is the bigger problem, okay?
Are we talking about
Councillor?
debt? Sorry, are we talking about the debt?
Yep, I'm talking about the debt.
Okay, all right.
Okay? In line with other comments that have been made, Mr. Mayor. But I suppose that's a problem too, is it?
No, we're talking about the debt. That's the motions we got on the table.
And the two comments that have just been made from the other previous speakers about the community and what was said by the community was
Tie it back to the debt. Tie it back to the debt.
Right, well, might we tie it back to the debt, one way or another?
All right.
So, in line with, as I was saying, with what Councillor Harper touched on earlier, that we talk about what's happened in the community and what the community want and don't want. Yes, dead right, Councillor Johnson, there is mixed views and we go different ways. But to deliberately go out and mislead the community with allegations of libraries getting closed and us receiving hundreds of emails around library closure, that is really misleading, and that's not the game that should be played.
So Councillor, I can't see a connection to the
Oh,
debt.
I'm trying to get there.
Well, can we speed it up, please?
I'm working on it. I'm not running for mayor.
Yeah, look, I'm being serious here. We okay. Councillor Johnson.
If you'll allow, Mr. Mayor, I think I'd like to just clarify some of the points that have been made across the room, and also some of the points that elected members have made in other public forums. And that is that there was one elected member that went out and told the community that libraries were going to close. So let's be clear, there were 4 elected members that went to speak to members of the community. I can't say exactly what the other 3 said, but I know what I said myself, and I'm happy to repeat it here. What I said was that there was a list of proposed potential cuts or deferrals or changes to the budget, many of which impacted on community. That potentially closing our Pooney and Roslin branch libraries was on the list. That I did not know...
Point of order, Mr. Mayor.
No, allegations have been made.
Yep,
I think it's
okay.
fair that I'm allowed to answer
So
them.
colleagues, Councillor, I've let you have a go, so please sit down. You've got your point across. Councillor Naylor, I'm not allowing you to speak again. You've already spoken.
No,
Colleagues.
I was raising a point of order.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I've dealt with it. Thank you. So look, colleagues, I'm not going to even give a right or reply because we've got the motions on the table, the 7 of them, and I'm going to ask you to vote on them, please. Now, please. And that is passed 11 votes for and 4 against. Colleagues, good time to break. So we're going to have a break for lunch. We'll be back in the chamber at 1:15. Thank you.